Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Kuf Samach Hey Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today the very top line of the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Samach Hey Amud Aleph, Siman Shin Chav Ches Sif Yud Gimel. Our learning should be a schus for Achinu Kabeis Yisrael Hanasunim Batzaru Bashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayamu Bein Bayabasha Hamakem Yerachem Aleihem V'Yetziah Mitzaru Lervacha Me'afelu La'Oiro Mishuba L'Gu'ula Hashta Bagalo V'Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema for Yehoshua Levi Ben Ahuva Malkachana Gila Shifra Bas Ilan Udel Yitzchak Ben Tzion Ben Dusha Rivka Bas Shira Leah Chava Hadassah Bas Serol. They should all have or Refuah Shalema B'Sar Shar Chayli Yisrael, and we are mispal that B'schus the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael, the Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael B'chol Makom Shehem. So here in Siman Shin Chav Ches, we're discussing the halachas of what you may and may not do on Shabbos on behalf of a chayla. And once again here in Sif Yud Gimel, the Mechaber goes out of his way to make the point again. Kol hazariz lechal Shabbos b'davar sheyesh by sakana harei zeh meshubach. Whoever acts with alacrity to be mechal Shabbos on behalf of a chayla sheyesh by sakana harei zeh meshubach, he is praiseworthy. And the Mechaber adds in here another point. Afilu im misakin imay davar acher. Even if, when he's doing the malacha on behalf of the chayla sheyesh by sakana, he ends up accomplishing another malacha as well, even or more of the same malacha, even though that is not necessary for the chayla sheyesh by sakana. Kigain, for example, says the Mechaber, sheparas mitzuda, somebody spreads out a net, laha'alois tinoik shanafa lanohar. A child was swept away into the river, chas v'chalila, and they have to get the child. So somebody takes a net and throws a net out into the river so that the child should either be caught in the net or the child should be able to grab hold of the net. Vitzadi my dogim. And now he also catches fish. So he was Pares a Mitzuda. He opened up a net in the nar to get the child. He ended up catching fish. There was no pekuach nefesh involved in catching the fish. Still, harei zeh meshubach v'chein kol kiyotza bazeh, or anything similar to this. So the Mechaber is going out of his way because, look, Baruch Hashem, Klal Yisrael, we treat Shabbos with great severity. And the Mechaber wants us to know that if you're B'chal Shabbos on behalf of Chayla Sheyesh by Sakana, so in this case, you went ahead, you threw out a net, and now you end up catching fish. You might feel terrible. I caught fish on Shabbos. Catching fish on Shabbos didn't help the tinoik in any way, shape, or form. You should know, harei zeh meshubach. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kan Lamed Ches, v'chein kol kiyotza bazeh, where the Mishnah Berurah gives us additional examples. Kigain, for example, nafal tinoik labor. A tinoik fell into some kind of a pit. Oiker chulya uma'alehu. So what you want to do is, you want to fashion a step so that the child should be able to climb up a step and then get out of the bar. How do you fashion a step in the wall of the bar? You take a shovel and you shovel out a chulya. You take a shovel and you shovel out an area of earth, and that creates a step. Now the tinoik could step up and get out, or maybe you could step down and bring up the tinoik. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even though by doing this you are fashioning a very useful step, so this could be baina, you're fashioning a very useful step to get down into the bar, or ninal hadelas bifnei hatinoik, a door got closed into a room where there's a very young child, and now the child is stuck in the room. Shoiver adelas, you can break the door down, umaitziai, and take the child out. Even though what might happen is, there's different ways of breaking down the door. Not necessarily are you going to barrel into the door, just bust the door down. Maybe that's not the appropriate or the available way or the fastest way to do it. Maybe you're going to cut the door up. Now, by cutting the door up, you might fashion very usable pieces of wood. Shenasim kimin nisarim, maybe by doing this, you're going to create very usable boards that you might later build a stender out of. Oy kismin lahadlaka. Or maybe you'll break down the door into strips of wood that will then be very useful for kindling. So again, you're performing Meleches Isser on Shabbos, and that Meleches Isser is not really the Pekuach Nefesh piece. Afilu hachi muter hashvira, it's still muter, shema yivas atinoik v'yamus, because he can't leave the tinoik in there. The tinoik might become terrified, he's locked into a room, and he could be b'sakana. V'loyam rinan, and we don't say she'efshel lekarkesh lahatinoik be'agoizim mibachutz ad she'yaviu ha'mafteach. The child is locked in the room, and the child is screaming his head off, right? So you might say, why should I break the door down? Breaking the door down is going to entail malacha. You know what? I'll get a toy. I'll shake with a rattle. I'll do something outside to try to calm the baby down until somebody could go get a key. No, this is dangerous. Bust the door down. And even though you might have use of the chulya, let's say when you dug a step for the bar, maybe you need that earth. Maybe you're going to use that earth for something. Or maybe you need the step. Or by cutting down the door, maybe you need boards. You have plans to build a stender next week. Or you need the kindling for firewood. Gam kein shari. So again, the point over here is that you're doing Meleches Isser because it's a sakana, but it's not, you're going to gain from the Meleches Isser that you're doing in a different way that has nothing to do with the Pekuach Nefesh. You're going to spread out a net to go get the child out, and you're going to end up with fish because you caught fish. Be'isser on Shabbos. You're going to cut the door up, and you're going to end up with a stack of kindling, or you're going to end up with a stack of boards that you're going to use to build your stender. Gam kein shari kemen she'ena mechaved lozeh. That's not your kavana. Your kavana is not to gain these things. Your kavana is to do the malacha, to perform the Meleches Isser for Pekuach Nefesh, and therefore it is mutter. That brings us to a very, very interesting sif over here. That's going to give us a very yesaidistic chakira in this halacha that Pekuach Nefesh is doiche Shabbos. Says the Mechaber, "Hoye chayla sheyesh by sakana tzarich basar." You have a chayla sheyesh by sakana, and he needs meat. He needs to eat meat. Okay, sheichtem loy. You're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to shecht an animal on Shabbos in order to provide kosher meat for the chayla sheyesh by sakana. Ve'ein oimrim nachilenu nevela, and you don't say let him eat nevela. So, in other words, let's say you have a situation over here. You have a chayla sheyesh by sakana. He must have meat. All right. There happens to be a dead carcass of an animal. An animal died, or an animal was killed, not through shchita, and the carcass is available. So really, you could butcher up this carcass, and you could give this meat to the chayla sheyesh by sakana. Now, the problem, obviously, is that this meat is not kosher meat. This is basar nevela. This animal did not receive a proper shchita, so this is basar nevela. It's treifa meat. So your choice is, do I serve the chayla sheyesh by sakana treifa meat, or do I go ahead and do a proper shchita on a kosher animal, do a proper shchita, and go ahead and feed the chayla sheyesh by sakana kosher meat? Now, let's do the math. The nevela meat is available. You're not going to have to be over any Isurei Shabbos, certainly not Isurei Daraisa, to give him this nevela meat. You don't have to do shchita. It's here readily available. Now, yeah, he's going to eat basar nevela. So the chayla is going to be over the Isurei Daraisa of eating basar nevela. But you will not be over any Isurei Daraisa. Or you could go ahead and do shchita. Do shchita, that's netilas neshama. That's an Issa Daraisa, that's Chil Shabbos Daraisa. So now you're going to be over Chil Shabbos Daraisa in order to provide the chayla sheyesh by sakana with kosher meat. Which one makes more sense? The truth is, if you do the math this way, it would see, why don't we say, well, Pekuach Nefesh is doiche Shabbos. If Pekuach Nefesh is doiche Shabbos, Pekuach Nefesh is definitely doiche the Yisr Nevela. The Yisr Nevela on the surface of it, the Issa Nevela is more kal than Chil Shabbos. So let the Chayla Sheyesh Paisakana go ahead and eat Basa Nevela. Why should you go ahead and be over an Issa Daraisa of Chil Shabbos to do Shchita to provide him with kosher meat? Yet, the Mechaber says that's not the halacha. The Mechaber says, Sheichtim loy. No, you do shecht for him. Ve'ein oimrim nachilenu nevela. And we don't say feed him nevela. Aval, however, the Mechaber does qualify this, and the Mechaber says, Im hoya ha'chayla tzarech la'achila la'alter. But if the chayla needs to eat meat right away, v'ha'nevela muchenes miyad, and the nevela meat is available right here, v'ha'shchita misacheres loy, and to go shecht and provide kosher meat is going to cause a delay, then machila noisai nevela. Then give the chayla the nevela. We're not going to create a delay for a chayla sheyesh by sakana, who the doctors say he needs to eat meat right now. We're not going to say, oh, well, we have to go and we have to shecht and we have to go to bedikas and this and that. No. If he needs meat right away and there's basa nevela, give him basa nevela. But all things being equal, and the choice is just, should we give him basa nevela or should we wait and do shchita? Then you go ahead and do shchita. And obviously this is tzarech biur. We need to understand this. Why does this make sense? So we have a very fascinating Mishnah Berurah over here. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Lamed Tes, says the Chavetz Chaim. Harbe taimim nemar zeh. There are many different reasons that are given for this psak. Yesh oimrim, there are those that say, and this is brought down for the Rosh in the name of the Rambam, says the Rosh, Yesh oimrim, misham de Shabbos hutra eitzel pikuach nefesh. Let's read a little bit weiter, and then I'll explain this. Ulekach, and therefore, sheichted loy, we shecht for the chayla sheyesh by sakana, kiderech shesheichetin b'yomtiv. The same way we perform shchita on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, you're allowed to go shecht an animal on Yom Tov, and then go butcher up the meat, and then cook the meat for your Yom Tov Suda. So too, says the Chavetz Chaim, one reason that's given why you're going to shecht for the chayla sheyesh by sakana is because Shabbos hutra eitzel pikuach nefesh. Now let's discuss this for a minute. And let's do what the Chavetz Chaim did. Let's use shchita and indeed bishul on Yom Tov as an example. So we know that the halacha is that you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. Now bishul is meleches iser daraisa on Shabbos. There's no question that bishul is malacha. Yet, the malacha of bishul is mutter on Yom Tov. Tzarech eichel nefesh, you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. Tzarech eichel nefesh, you're allowed to shecht an animal on Yom Tov. Even though netilas neshama is definitely malacha, it's also on Shabbos, but you're allowed to shecht, to provide meat on Yom Tov for Sudas Yom Tov. Now the question is why? How do you look at it? And there's two different ways to look at it. One way to look at it is what we call hutra, where we say that the malacha of netilas neshama when it comes to shchita, or the malacha of bishul when it comes to cooking on Yom Tov, is hutra. It's mutter completely. There is no iser malacha of shchita or of bishul on Yom Tov. It is 100% mutter. The other way to look at it is what we call dechuya. It's not 100% mutter. It's overridden. It's cast aside. It's dechuya. What does that mean? That means that really bishul is taka malacha. And since it's malacha, really bishul should be aser on Yom Tov. Shchita is netilas neshama. Since netilas neshama is malacha and malacha is aser on Yom Tov, really shchita should be aser on Yom Tov. But we have a problem. The problem is people need to eat. And since people need to eat, the Torah said, you know what? Dechuya. We override or we push aside the Isser Malacha of Bishul and the Isser Malacha of the Netilas Neshama on Shabbos to allow for Eichel Nefesh, to allow you to prepare food for Yom Tov. So really, in a certain sense, that would mean that the Isser B'Mekayim Edes, really it is Isser Malacha, but it is overridden by the needs of Eichel Nefesh. That would be two ways to look at it. Now, on Yom Tov, we say Hutra. We don't say Dechuya. We say Hutra. We say no. The halacha is that when it comes to Eichel Nefesh, there is no Isser of Netilas Neshama. Shchita is 100% mutter. There is no Isser of Bishul. Bishul is 100% mutter on Yom Tov, and therefore we would not hesitate. We don't hesitate to cook on Yom Tov because it's hutra. Eichel nefesh is hutra eitzel Yom Tov. Is it 100? It's 100% mutter. Now we could apply the same shaila to pekuach nefesh on Shabbos. How are we supposed to look at this? We could look at it and we say, we have a chayil sheyesh by sakana, he needs meat. Now the halacha is that pikuach nefesh is doicha Shabbos. Now what does that mean? Does that mean that, pikuach nefesh, there are no more isurim of Shabbos? In the case of pikuach nefesh, the halacha is that Shabbos is hutra, eitzel pikuach nefesh. You're dealing with a chayil sheyesh by sakana, you should know if you need to shecht, there's no isser whatsoever. It is 100% mutter. Shabbos, hutra, eitzel pikuach nefesh. Now, if that's the case, if we paskin that Shabbos is hutra, eitzel pikuach nefesh, so then now let's do the math. We have a chayil sheyesh by sakana. There's two choices here. He can eat basar nevela. Well, eating basar nevela is in issa daraisa. Or you could go ahead and you could shecht meat for him so he can have kosher meat. Well, to shecht the meat is not an isser at all because Shabbos is hutra eitzel pikuach nefesh. So okay, it's 100% mutter to go shecht the meat. So why should he eat basar nevela? Why should he be over in issa daraisa and eat basar nevela? Go ahead and do the shchita, which is 100% mutter, and go ahead and provide him with kosher meat. So says the Mishnah Berurah, that's the first reason that's given why the Mechaber paskins that you could go ahead and you could shecht and give him kosher meat. Because Shabbos is hutra, eitzel pekuach nefesh, and there is no isser involved in the shchita whatsoever. So go ahead and shecht. Better that than he should do an isser and he should eat basar nevela. And he compares it to Mishnah Berurah. He compares it to cooking on Yom Tov. You don't have to hesitate to cook on Yom Tov. It's not like b'diavad that really there's an isser involved in cooking, but it's techuya because tzarech eichel nefesh. No, it's 100% mutter. Don't hesitate. Go ahead and cook on Yom Tov. So too over here. No, don't have him eat basar nevela b'isser. Go ahead and check for him because shchita is 100% mutter. That's reason number one that the Mishnah Berurah gives here. And the Mishnah Berurah says, if you follow that logic, afilu issa derabanan ein machilin oisai. So then you wouldn't give the chayla even something which is only an issa derabanan. She'ef shaloi lishchait mitam zeh. If you're able to shecht and give him 100% kosher meat, because again, the shchita is 100% mutter. It's not an issa deraisa, it's not an issa derabanan, it's not a b'diavad, it's 100% lechatchila. Shabbos is hutra eitzel pekuach nefesh. So why should the chayla eat something that's also b'derabanan? Give him 100% mutter kosher meat by doing a 100% mutter shchita. That's reason number one. Aval, however, says the Mishnah Berurah, harbe rishonim kosvu, many rishonim write to Shabbos rak techuyehi. Many rishonim write that that's not true. We don't say Shabbos is hutra eitzel pekuach nefesh. We only say Shabbos is techuya mipnei pekuach nefesh. And the truth is, that's the lashon that we use all the time. We say pekuach nefesh is doiche Shabbos. That would mean that the isser netilas neshama b'mkaima emedes. There is an isser of shchita. It is netilas neshama, but the halacha is that since it's a case of pekuach nefesh, you're allowed to go ahead and do it, even though the isser is there. You're allowed to do it anyway. But that means that you are doing an isser when you go ahead and you shecht that animal. It's a strange thing. It's an isser that you're allowed to do. It's techuya. But the isser is b'mkami amedes. Now, if that's true, well, now let's do the math. So now the question comes back. Why should you go ahead and do the isser of shchita, the netilas neshama, let the chayla go ahead and eat basar nevela? So, aval harbe rishonim kosvu the Shabbos rak techuyehi. So now we need a new reason. We need a new explanation. Why is it mutter for you to go ahead and do the shchita so that the chayla shouldn't eat basar nevela? Ela hatamu, rather, they say that the reason is a different reason. What we're afraid of is, you have a chayla sheyesh by sakana, and he needs to eat meat. Now you're going to go over to him and you're going to start giving him meat. And he's going to look at you and he's going to say, oh, you mamish, you had a chance to go shecht meat, that he giving me kosher meat? And he said, no, it's Basin Avela, but it's okay, you're a chayil sheish by sakana. He doesn't want to eat Basin Avela. And now, because he's sickened, he's repulsed and disgusted by the idea of eating the Basin Avela, he's not going to want to eat it. The doctor is telling him, eat, you need to eat meat. You're a chayil sheish by sakana, you need to eat meat. And he's taking his fork and he doesn't want to eat it. So he's not going to eat, or he's not going to eat enough, or he's not going to eat fast enough. And now he might come to sakana. So now the explanation is, the reason you're allowed to shecht for him on Shabbos is because that's taka pikuach nefesh. You need to shecht for him, because the Basin Avela is not going to work. He's not going to eat it. The only way you could save this guy is by doing a shechita and giving him kosher meat. And that's why you're allowed to shecht. Ube Beis Yosef, hevi oitam b'shem Aran. The Beis Yosef brings down another explanation in the name of the Ran. And he says, Didim in Avela, oiver al kol kezayis mimena, the chomer me iser lav de Shabbos. This is a very interesting explanation. He says, at face value, if you're on the surface, when you're comparing the iser of shechita on Shabbos and the iser of eating Basin Avela, and somebody asked you which one is more chomer, you would jump up right away and you would say, well, being Chil Shabbos, that's definitely more chomer than eating Basin Avela. Chil Shabbos is an Issa Skila. It's Shabbos. Basin Avela is a lav. It's a lav greda. It's a, so to speak, an ordinary lav. It's not Issa Misa. It's not Chiv Misa. Shabbos is a Skila. But the Ran says, not so fast. When the chayla sheyesh by sakana is going to sit down and chow down on a meat meal of Basin Avela, he's going to be over an Issa Daraisa for every single kazayas that he eats. So, if he eats a meal, he's being over another Issa Daraisa, another Issa Daraisa, another Issa Daraisa, another Issa Daraisa. For you to go ahead and do shechita, even though it's a chiv skila, but it's one Issa Daraisa. You do shechita, and you're over an Issa Daraisa. Zehu, it's one Issa Daraisa. Says the Ran, it's more chomer to be over multiple Isurei Daraisa again, that's more chomer than being over one Issa Daraisa, even though it's a Chiv Skila, and that's why when we do the math, we say you do the Shechita and be over one Issa Daraisa. That's better than having the Chayil Sheish by Sakana be over multiple Isurei Daraisa for every Kazayis of the Vela that he eats. Void Tam Ayin Shaman, and the Beis Yosef brings down yet another reason that Mishnah Berurah doesn't go into. Now, says the Mishnah, so it comes out like this. It comes out that we have three explanations for this psak of the Mechabers, that you should shecht a behema on Shabbos to provide the chayla sheyesh by sakana with kosher meat, better than the chayla should eat available nevela meat. Three explanations. Explanation number one, Shabbos is hutra eitzel pikuach nefesh. The shchita is 100% mutter because you're dealing with a chayla sheyesh by sakana. So better do a 100% mutter shchita than have the chayla sheyesh by sakana go ahead and eat nevela. Now, obviously, there's a pretty obvious question on that reason. And the question is, hold it. If you're telling me that Shabbos is hutra eitzel pikuach nefesh, and therefore you should do shchita because it's 100% mutter, but how about the Yisra Nevela? That's not hutra eitzel pikuach nefesh? I mean, if it's 100% mutter for you to go ahead and shecht an animal, netilas neshama on Shabbos, because Shabbos is hutra eitzel pikuach nefesh, but it's not hutra for the chayil himself to eat basa nevela? So that's a very strong question. A lot of reasons, a lot of different explanations given for that beyond the scope of what we do here, but that is a pretty obvious question on that reason. The second reason that we had was, no, nothing to do. Really, Shabbos is dechuya eitzel pikuach nefesh. And yeah, there is a certain level of isser in the fact that you're going ahead and you're doing the shechita. Now, you do it, and you do it with alacrity, harei zeh meshubach. You're mechuyev to do it, but it's dechuya, it's not hutra. If it's dechuya, so why should I go ahead and do the shechita on Shabbos? Let him go ahead and eat basa nevela, right? The answer is no. There's a problem with him eating basa nevela. We're afraid that he's not going to eat the basa nevela, and therefore he's going to be b'sakana. So the pikuach nefesh factor demands that you do a shechita to give him kosher meat. because he's not going to eat the nevela meat. And then the third reason that we saw was that no, nevela is taka more chomer, because he's going to be over multiple Isuri Daraisa. For every kazayis he eats, he's going to be over another Isur Daraisa. You're going to be over only one Isur Daraisa when you do the Shechita. It's more chomer for the chayla to be over multiple Isuri Daraisa than for you to be over one Isur Daraisa, even though it's an Isur Daraisa sheyesh b'chiv skila. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ulefi zeh, according to the last reason that we had over here, bevadai mutav lavar ulahoshit lo isur derabanan mishenechal Shabbos be'isur skila. If we're going to say that the reason we tell you to do the shkita is because it's more chamor for the chayla to be over multiple isuri daraisa than for you to be over one isur daraisa of shkita, well, how about if you have meat that's only also b'derabanan that you could give the chayla? Well, then certainly it's more kal for the chayla to eat something that's also b'derabanan than to you do a shchita that's an issa b'daraisa. So according to that rationale, you would taka give the chayla something that's also b'derabanan before you would do a shchita. Now says the Mishnah Berurah, v'hinei im ha'chayla omer she'ein kotz ba'achilas nevela v'yesh nevela mizum levanav. Let's say you have the case where you have nevela meat readily available, and you have a behemoth that you could checht. And the chayla says, listen, don't do shchita. I'm a chayla sheish by sakana. I'll eat the basa nevela. I'm allowed to eat the basa nevela because I'm a chayla sheish by sakana. I'm not going to be cuts. I'll eat it fast. I'll eat the proper amount. I don't want you to be over this daraisa of shchita on my behalf. In mutter lishchait avurai, are you allowed to go shecht for him? Ayin ba'achroinim. Mishnah Berurah says, ayin ba'achroinim. V'al kol panim, nevertheless, certainly li'ini katan, if you have a cotton that's a chayla she'esh by sakana, bevadai nira de tov yaser lahachiloi b'sar nevela v'liyishchait adam avura b'Shabbos. If you're dealing with a cotton who's a chayla she'esh by sakana, says the Mishnah Berurah, certainly give the cotton basar nevela, and he's not chay b'mitzvahs anyway. So there's no isser for him, and befrat, it's pekuach nefesh, let him eat the basa nevela, and you don't go ahead and do shchita. Kasav Ba'Gas Mordechai. Ba'Gas Mordechai writes an interesting halacha. Im tzarich laharsiach yayin avur chayla. Let's say the doctors say that this chayla sheyesh by sakana, he needs hot wine. That's what he needs for a refuah. He needs hot wine. So now, you need wine, and you need to cook up the wine. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, quoting the Hagas Mordechai, Yemale Yisrael. You have over here, you have wine, it's not mavushal, and you have an Eina Yehudi. Now, you have two issues that you have to deal with over here. One is you have to heat up the wine. Heating up the wine is going to entail the Isser Malacha of Bishul. You're going to take a liquid that is cold, and you're going to heat it up to the point of Yad Seledes, that is Bishul, Daraisa. So you need to perform the malach of Bishul Daraisa to heat up the wine. Now you have an Eina Yehudi. Tony is here in the kitchen. Really, you could have Tony do the Meleches Isser. Have Tony go ahead and boil up the wine, so nobody has to be B'chal Shabbos. But the problem is that for Tony to handle the wine is going to turn the wine into Yayin Nesech. Now Yayin Nesech is in a Siddur. What do? Says the Mishnah Berurah, in such a case, Yemale Yisrael. The first thing we should do is, a Yid should take the wine. So far Tony hasn't handled the wine. A Yid should take the wine and pour the wine into the pot when the pot's not on the fire. He should pour the wine into the pot. So far, you have avoided Yayin Nesech. Tony hasn't handled the wine. If Tony would pick up the bottle of wine and pour it into the pot, it would already be Yayin Nesech. It would be the Sidrabanan of Yayin Nesech. But so far you've avoided that. You picked up the bottle of wine, you poured it into the pot. So far it's not Yayin Nesech. V'yachem ha'Eina Yehudi. Now let the Eina Yehudi do the bishul. Let him go turn on the fire and do the bishul. So you're not being Machal Shabbos. Tony's going ahead. Tony's doing the bishul. Now, the problem with this is that you do have the guy handling the wine. Now, just turning on the fire under the pot doesn't make the Yayin Nesech. Taking a spoon and stirring the wine, I think, also doesn't make it Yayin Nesech. taking the wine and pouring it into the pot would make it yayin nesach. But just handling the pot, I don't think makes it yayin nesach. The catch is that if the guy touches the wine, let's say he wants to see how hot it is. If he touches the wine, it's going to be yayin nesach. So by allowing the Ein Yehudi to warm up the wine, you definitely are risking the wine becoming yayin nesach. But yayin nesach is Yisra Rabbanan. And you're avoiding the Yisra Daraisa of Bishul. So says Dagos Mordechai, that's what you should do. Umutav sheyisnasei chayayin misheyischal Shabbos. It's better to risk that the wine might become yayin nesach, and the chayla might end up drinking wine that's also b'derabanan al yayin nesach. That's better than going ahead and you doing Yisra Daraisa of Bishul. V'atam ayin b'darkei Moshe shekasa. If you take a look at the Ramah in the Torah in the Darkei Moshe, he explains, Kevin she'isra stam yenam ela einay ela b'derabanan. We're calling this yayin nesach, but it's not really yayin nesach. Real yayin nesach is yayin that the guy took and he poured it out as a libation to Avodah Zarah. That's not happening over here. Over here, it's yayin nesach, the Yisra D'Rabbanan, which is an Yisra D'Rabbanan that's stam yenam. Any wine that was handled by an Ein Yehudi, we don't know that he poured it out to Avodah Zarah. Indeed, in this case, we know for certain that he didn't pour it out to Avodah Zarah. We were standing there the whole time. But it still has the Yisra D'Rabbanan of stam yenam, but this is only an Yisra D'Rabbanan. V'gam isure kal, and also relative to, let's say, Basar Nevela, yayin nesach is looked upon as being a more lenient isser. Remember, we're talking about stam yenam. We're not talking about real yayin nesach, we're talking about stam yenam. So, Basar Nevela, treifa meat, people look at that as, that's a much worse isser than an isser d'Rabbanan of stam yenam. And why does that matter? Because ve'en achel katzpai. Over here, we don't have to worry that the chayla is going to be fa'ekelt, he's going to be famiust, and he's going to say, I'm not drinking the wine, because there's a risk that it might be stam yenam. By Basar Nevela, we have to worry that the chayla sheish by sakana might not eat the meat. But by stam yenam, we don't have to worry that he's not going to drink the stam yenam. Well, and therefore says the Ramah, Mutav sheyachem Ein Yehudi, it would be better that the Ein Yehudi should warm up the wine, even though it's risking making it stam yenam. Imu mezumad lefanav, if the Tony is right there ready to do it, shelo yishal yidei, so that there won't be any delay. If there'll be a delay, certainly the Yid right away should do the Yisra Daraisa of Bishul and hareza meshubach. The Chanal b'sif Yud Beis b'Hagah, the Su. And furthermore, the Kabbalah b'Yeridei Simcha Chavei Yud, Deina Yehudi Amoilach Kli Pasuach v'Yisrael Mishamar Shlo Yisnasech Shari. We really have a shita in Yeridei that says when a guy is handling the wine, but you're watching him the whole time, so you know that it wasn't yayin nesach, it's gar mutter, so they wouldn't give him an Yisra D'Rabbanan over here. In Kain Efshar Lechama Ma'al Yedei Ein Yehudi B'Linisach. So then you're watching the guy. Stand there, watch him the whole time. Make sure that he doesn't do anything with the wine that he's not supposed to do, and there won't be any Isser, not even an Isser D'Rabbanan. So you could accomplish providing the Chayla Sheyesh by Sakana with hot wine without any risk of Yayin Nesach whatsoever. Certainly the Mishnah Berurah says that if somebody is a mekel, and he says the Chayla Sheyesh by Sakana needs hot wine, I'm going and I'm warming up the wine, and limchais biyada, you cannot object. The yesh le'am yilismaich ayin b'taz b'sif katan hay, where again we learned this taz earlier. That's the taz here on Kuf Samech Hey Amud Aleph. It's the taz brought down in Mishnah Berurah's Katan Lamed Zayin, who says that it's not the minig of the Vesikin to go ahead and use an Ein Yehudi, let a Yisrael do whatever has to be done for a Chayla Sheyesh by Sakana, because Kalazar is hareze mishubach. Moving along to Sif Tezvav, 5 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch, says the Mechaber. Amaduhu, if the people evaluated the Chayla. What does Amaduhu mean? Says the Ramah in the parentheses, Pirush, Hispainenu b'machalasai, they looked into his ailment, into his illness, V'shiaru haroifim, and the doctors have evaluated, Shetzarich gregeres achas. Somehow, the doctors looked at this Chayla Sheyesh by Sakana, and he said, he must eat a fig. One fig. Now, the problem is that the figs are attached to the tree. And in order to provide the Chayla Sheyesh by Sakana with a fig, you have to be over the Issa Daraisa of Toilish. One of the Lamed Tes Balachas. You have to go pick a fig off the tree. So, chayil sheish by sakana, he needs a fig. You're allowed to go and do toilish. You're allowed to pick the fig. Now, the catch is, he only needs one fig. Okay. So, amadu, haroifim, shetarch gregeres achas. Virotzu asara. 10 people are in the room. And 10 people heard the doctor say that he needs one fig. 10 people went bolting out the door to go find a fig. There isn't a fig right outside. There isn't a fig tree right outside. But there's fig trees in the shtetl. So 10 people ran out of the house to go get figs. They view like kalechad gregaris. And 10 people came back, each one with a fig. So that means 10 people ran out of the house. 10 people went ahead and did the Issa Darais of Toilish. They picked a fig off a tree. And 10 people may have also done the Issa Daraisa of Hoitzah. They took the fig, they carried it Dalet Amos in Rishus HaRabim, and they transferred it from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid. So you have 10 people who all went ahead and were over Isirei Daraisa in order to bring this Chayil Sheish by Sakana a fig. But he only needed one fig, and now he has 10 figs. So how do we look at it? Do we look at it and say, well, the first one who brought the fig and gave him the fig, and he ate the fig, and now Baruch Hashem, he's cured, that guy, he wasn't over Chil Shabbos. But the other 9, they didn't provide the Chayla with what he needed. The Chayla is already fine. The Chayla didn't need the fig anymore. Could be that even when they plucked the fig, maybe the last guy showed up an hour later. And meantime, the Chayla ate the fig already an hour ago. And could be that even when he picked the fig off the tree, the Chayla already wasn't the Chayla Sheish by Sakana. So do we say that he was Mechal Shabbos? The one who provided the Chayla Sheish by Sakana with the fig, obviously he wasn't Mechal Shabbos. Pekuach Nefesh. But the other 9, were they Mechal Shabbos? Says the Mechaber Kulam Piturim. They're all potter. Now, having learned, holding on Kuf Samachayim and Aleph in Archaim, in Mishnah Berurah Gimel, we all know that potter usually means potter aval oser. Sounds like it would be at least an Isser D'Rabbanan. It sounds like he's potter, but there is some level of Isser involved here. Says the Mechaber, V'yesh lehem schar toiv me'es Hashem. And they're going to get wonderful reward from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Afilu hivru barishayna. Even though the Chayla Sheish by Sakana was already cured by the first fig that he ate. Now, I'm reading this to you, and I'm reading to you the Mechaber, telling you that the Mechaber is being very clear that there's no Isser here whatsoever. There are Shitas that say, no, the Medayik and the Lashon of the Rambam, that the Rambam holds that there is an Isser, but even though there's an Isser, still Yesh Lehem Schar Tov Me'es Hashem. But the bottom line is, the Mechaber says, Yesh Lehem Schar Tov Me'es Hashem. They did nothing wrong. And it's very important to know that, because otherwise people are going to hesitate, right? 3 people already ran out to get figs. I'm not going. Maybe you should go. Maybe you'll be the first one to find a fig. You're dealing with a Chayil Sheish by Sakana. So we want all 10 to go, and we want all 10 to come back with figs. And that's why the Mechaber is telling you, Yesh lem schar tov me'es Hashem, afilu hivru barishayna. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Mem, V'rotzu asara. 10 people ran out to go collect figs. Shekal echad chashav shehu yakdim. Each one thought maybe he'll be the first one to come back with a fig. They're all worried about the Chayil Sheish by Sakana. They all ran out to go get figs. Obviously, they each hope that they're going to find a fig as quickly as possible and come back with a fig. V'ayin b'bir halacha for greater detail. They performed the malacha daraisa either through the malacha of toilish or from hitzah. Even if the Chayil Sheish by Sakana was already cured when he ate the first fig, so when the other 9 were Mechal Shabbos, there was no longer a Chayil Sheish by Sakana. Pirush, Shaviu loy b'zeh achar. The 10 people came back, one after the other. Ukvar ocham mima shaviu loy rishon v'hivri. But the bottom line is that the Chayil Sheish by Sakana was already cured when the first person came back with a fig and he ate the first fig. So the second guy comes back, he finds a healthy person. The third guy comes back, he finds a healthy person. We don't say, you're going to have to bring a karbachatos. Look, bottom line, you were Mechal Shabbos b'shoigig. You thought you were doing it for Pekuach Nefesh. You weren't doing it for Pekuach Nefesh. No, the answer is they're all potter. They all did it for Pikuach Nefesh. Mishum Dechalech Chashav Shu Yakdim. Every one of them was hoping he would be back first. They did it with the intent that they're doing it for a chayil sheyesh by sakana. V'loy levad shepturim. Not only the potter, eliyesh lem gam schar toiv avur machshavtam hatoiva. Okay, we have time for one more short sif. I don't think I made a bracha before this year. Actually, I'm certain that I did not. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam sha'kol nihiyeh b'dvarai. I'm always makbid to make the bracha before I start the shir. That way I know that I could drink during the shir. But I wasn't expecting to drink during the shir. This is a drink that was left over from my breakfast that I ate quite a while ago. It was sitting here on my desk. I got thirsty. I took a drink. But I neglected to make a bracha before the shir. Okay. Zakta mechaber weiter, 4 lines off the bottom, Sif Tezayin. Amadu lishtei groigrois. Okay, again, we have a chayil sheyesh by sakana. The doctors convene, they do a preliminary exam, and they go ahead and they say, this chayil sheyesh by sakana, he needs to eat 2 figs. All right, chayil sheyesh by sakana, he needs 2 figs. You're allowed to go, and you're allowed to go pick figs, and you're allowed to transport figs through the Rishos HaRabim. He's a chayil sheyesh by sakana. Now, the Mechaber presents us with an interesting case. We know that fruits grow in different ways. So they go run to the fig tree. What do they find on the fig tree? V'loy matzu el shtei groigrois b'shnei uktzin. So first they look on the tree and they see 2 single figs. They see 1 fig attached to the tree with 1 stem, and another fig attached to the tree with its own stem. So now to pick these 2 figs, you're going to be over 2 Isurei Daraisa. Each act of Toilish is an individual Iser Daraisa. So right now, looking at this branch on the fig tree, in order to provide the Chayil Sheyesh by Sakana with what he needs, you're going to have to be over 2 Isurei Daraisa. You're going to have to do 2 acts of Toilish. Then you look somewhere else on the tree, and you find V'shalosh b'ukitz echad. Now you find on the fig tree a cluster of 3 figs connected to the tree with 1 stem. Now over here you could get 3 figs by doing 1 act of Toilish. So again, chayil sheyesh by sakana, he needs 2 figs. You have 2 different ways to provide him with the figs that he needs. On the one hand, you could go pick 2 individual figs. That would be 2 acts of Toilish, 2 Isurei Daraisa. On the other hand, over here, there's a cluster of 3 figs. If you go ahead and you cut this cluster off of the tree, you'll be over 1 Isurei Daraisa of Toilish. You'll be able to provide him with 2 figs, but you're going to be taking 3 figs off the tree. 1 act of Toilish, but 3 figs. The other way, 2 acts of Toilish, but only 2 figs. Which one is better? Says the Mechaber, Karsim ha'ukitz sheyesh by shalosh. You cut off the cluster of 3. Why? Because that's only 1 act of Toilish. It's only 1 Iser Daraisa. You're getting 3 figs, and you don't need 3 figs off the tree, but the bottom line is it's only 1 act of Toilish. So it's only 1 Iser Daraisa, as opposed to picking the 2 individual ones and doing 2 acts of Toilish, 2 Iser Daraisa. Okay? V'im ha'yushtayim b'ukitz echad. But now, let's say you have a cluster of 2, v'shalosh b'ukitz echad, and then you have another cluster of 3. Lo yichresu el ha'ukitz sheyesh b'shtayim. If you have 2 clusters, 1 of 2 and 1 of 3, then pick the cluster that has 2. In other words, if we would have only had the first halacha, if we would have had the first halacha that says, you need 2, there's 2 individual ones, or there's a cluster of 3, pick the cluster of 3. Why? Because that's only 1 Iser Daraisa, that's 2 Iser Daraisa. You might have looked at that halacha, and you might have said, so weiss dich aus that as long as it's 1 act of Toilish, it's 1 Iser Daraisa, I don't care that there are 3. So now let's pose the next question. So let's say he needs 2 gregris. There's one cluster of 2. There's one cluster of 3. There's one cluster of 10. Maybe I could go pick the cluster of 10. It's only one Issa Daraisa. It's only one act of Toilish. I'll pick the cluster of 10. I'll give him 2 figs. And on Sunday, I'll have another 8 figs in my kitchen. Because it's only one act, one Issa Daraisa. Says the Mechaber, no. If you have a cluster of 2 available, you have a cluster of 3 available, only pick the cluster of 2. Because still, you're not supposed to bring in more than you need. You're not supposed to take off the tree more than you need. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Oiskan Mem Gimel, Sheyesh by Shalosh, you have a cluster that has 3. In the case where you have 2 individual ones, or you have a cluster of 3, pick the cluster of 3, because you're being memayet techil Shabbos, because you're doing only one act of toilish. Mem dalid lo yichrasu ella, but if you have a choice between a cluster of 2 or a cluster of 3, in either case, you're only doing one act of toilish, still, you have to take the cluster of 2. The riboy b'shiyura shaloi l'tzarech aser. Because the bottom line is that you're being marbed b'shiyurim. You're bringing in a greater quantity. It's true that you're only doing one Isser Daraisa of toilish in both cases. But to take the cluster of 3 is called being marbed b'shiyurim. You're doing one Isser Daraisa, one act of malacha, but you're doing it with a greater quantity and with an unnecessary quantity. That's usher. Umikan nira, and from here you can see, says the Mishnah Berurah, Umikan nira pashut. It's obvious. The same thing would apply to any other malacha that you're doing for a chayla. Kigoin bishul v'chadayma. Let's say cooking. Let's say the doctor says this chayla sheish by sakana, he must have a tea. Okay. If the doctor says he needs a tea, all right, so it's an 8-ounce tea or a 10-ounce tea. Now, the act of boiling up water in a pot is one act of bishul. We don't say, oh, go ahead, put in 2 quarts of water and go ahead, put the pot on the fire and turn on the fire. It's one act of bishul, but you don't need 2 quarts of water. You only need 10 ounces of water for one tea. So why are you cooking up 2 quarts of water? That's marbe b'shiyurim. It's true that it's only one act, one Issa Daraisa of bishul. It's one act of malacha, but it's marbe b'shiyurim. You're not allowed to be marbe b'shiyurim. And the Mishnah Berurah says, Rak mashetzarech achshav b'tzimtzum. Now the Mishnah Berurah is exact, but now the Mishnah Berurah cautions us. V'madara bohol. But if this is an emergency situation, ein medaktikin b'kach u'gidol kamei. Now you learned this Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah says, oh, you're only allowed to cook up mamish b'tzimtzum. So the doctor says, he's a chol sheish b'sakana, quick, get him a tea. Excuse me, doctor, exactly how many ounces of tea does he need? Does he need 8 ounces of tea, or does he need 10 ounces of tea? Because the Mishnah Berurah says, I'm only allowed to do b'tzimtzum. Oh, dremenish cup, 10 ounces. Okay, 10 ounces. Go to the kitchen. 10 ounces. Medida, measuring is also aser. It's because nefesh. I won't measure, but I don't know. Is this 9 ounces? Is it 11 ounces? Hello, it's an emergency situation. Because nefesh. It's Shabbos. Go ahead and warm up water. Don't go crazy. If it won't be b'tzimtzum, it won't be b'tzimtzum. Harei zeh meshubach. It's talking about if you can, you're not allowed to be marbe b'shiyur. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discussing limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu should send Yeshua, Surfuas, Panal, and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the BSKL Tzedek, B'mher V'yameinu. Amen. Be well.